My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 27 years old, and my life turned upside down at what was supposed to be a joyful family dinner in Seattle. Picture this. The table filled with food, laughter echoing through the room, relatives raising their glasses to celebrate my grandparents' 50th anniversary. And then, out of nowhere, my grandfather leaned toward me. His voice was calm but sharp as a blade. "Olivia, the $300,000 I gave you after graduation, how did you use it?" My heart stopped. "300,000? What do you mean?" I stammered, my fork slipping from my fingers. The room froze. I could feel every eye on me. Across the table, my parents and my sister Emily went pale, their faces tight with panic, like guilty secrets had just been dragged into the light. Within minutes, accusations flew, lies unraveled, and the truth came crashing down in front of everyone. 30 minutes later, the police arrived, and what began as a celebration ended with betrayal, humiliation, and the shattering of a family bond I once thought unbreakable. Betrayal from family cuts the deepest. Have you ever been blindsided like that by the very people you trusted most? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me start from the beginning. My family had always been a scale tilted heavily to one side, and that side was never mine. My father, Daniel, was a strict man, but one who softened easily when faced with anything glamorous. My mother, Linda, often let her emotions override her reasoning, especially when it came to my younger sister, Emily. Emily, now 25, is a travel influencer who posts photos of her trips to Europe, the Maldives, or Dubai on Instagram, always accompanied by glittering Chanel, Gucci, and Dior bags under the sunlight. To my parents, every time Emily gained a few thousand more followers, it was celebrated as a dazzling achievement, while I, after years of hard work earning my MBA, was brushed off as simply taking a safe path, nothing remarkable. I still remember clearly how many times at family dinners, whenever I tried to share a business idea or talk about a project I was involved in at school, my father's eyes would instantly shift toward Emily, and the conversation would immediately steer toward the new dress she had just received from a brand or the luxury hotel sponsorship she had landed. I would sit there with my hands clenched tightly under the table, feeling as if my very existence was nothing more than a shadow. Olivia is very smart, but she's too dry, not charming like her sister. My mother would often remark, smiling as she poured more wine for my father. Those seemingly harmless words, repeated year after year, became quiet cuts that sank deep, teaching me to stay silent just to avoid comparison. Emily was used to being placed on a pedestal. She never had to worry about money because my parents always found a way to cover up or rescue her financial mistakes. A maxed-out credit card? My father quietly paid it off. Overspending on luxury travel? My mother would whisper, "Think of it as a little reward for yourself." Meanwhile, every tuition bill, every textbook, every meal in my tiny New York apartment came from endless hours of part-time work, whether at a marketing office or staying up late writing papers for other students. I did not resent it, but I realized early on that if I didn't prove my worth through effort, no one in my family would ever truly see me. Over time, I learned to hide the hurt behind polite smiles, and I turned the unfairness into fuel to push myself forward. I knew I could not change how my parents saw me, nor could I fight for the spotlight against Emily. The only path was to build my own way, where my success did not need applause but had to be strong enough that no one could deny it. That conviction drove me to pursue my MBA, even though in their eyes, I remained the bland child who lacked charm and social grace. After graduation, while my friends were submitting applications to major corporations in New York, I too received an offer from a mid-sized marketing firm. I could have easily accepted, starting a new chapter in the city with a stable salary and a clear career path. But deep down, I still hadn't let go of my dream of opening a cafe and bookshop in Seattle. I wanted to return home, to where my grandparents lived, to the place where my childhood was tied to rainy afternoons spent reading in a wooden house scented with pine, and where I believed I could build a creative space that New York was far too crowded to allow. My grandfather, Richard Carter, 72 years old, was a seasoned businessman in real estate. He was not only the pillar of our family but also the role model who made me believe that with persistence and vision, one could build an enduring legacy. I remembered him sitting with me in the living room overlooking the rose garden, his eyes lighting up as he said, "When you graduate, I'll help you get started." Those words became like a guiding light, strengthening my resolve to finish my education. But in reality, aside from the $100,000 in scholarships he had sponsored for me during my earlier years of study, I received no further support. Still, the belief that my grandfather had faith in my abilities was enough to drive me forward. I never blamed him for withholding more. On the contrary, I told myself that the absence of a safety net was what pushed me to work twice as hard, to learn how to survive in an expensive city, balancing part-time jobs to pay the bills while pouring everything I had into my studies. Just as I was torn between staying in New York or returning home, an unexpected message from my Aunt Helen appeared on my screen. She was my father's younger sister, one of the rare people in the family who always showed me genuine care. In her message, she wrote, "Olivia, don't forget to come back to Seattle tomorrow for your grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. They've been looking forward to seeing you." I read that line again and again, and my heart tightened. 50 years of marriage, a milestone I knew my grandparents had been preparing for a long time. I asked myself why my parents hadn't told me about it, and how I could possibly be absent on such a special day. I picked up the phone and called my mother. Her voice was rushed, unusually flustered. "Olivia, actually, the party might be postponed. Your grandfather isn't feeling well, just a cold, so don't rush back." Before I could respond, Emily cut in, her tone flat, as if she were reading from a prepared script. "Yeah, just stay in New York. The party might not even happen. Grandpa said you don't need to bother coming." The way they both spoke, hurried to the point of being suspiciously obvious, made me freeze. I knew my grandfather too well. He would never miss a family gathering, nor would he keep anything from me. If he had truly been ill, he would have called me himself, not let someone else deliver such vague excuses. A strange instinct crept over me. Something wasn't right. Every word from my mother and Emily felt like a curtain trying to cover something bigger, as if they were deliberately building a script to keep me from going back to Seattle. I set the phone down, my heart pounding fast. The question echoed sharply in my mind. Why didn't they want me to be there on my grandparents' important anniversary? That entire night, I barely slept. I lay in bed in my small New York apartment, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my mind spinning with unanswered questions. Why were my mother and Emily so quick to stop me from going back to Seattle? Why did they have to use my grandfather's health as an excuse when in all of my 27 years, I had known him never to hide anything about his condition from me? He was always straightforward, never evasive. If he were sick, he would have called me himself, reassuring me not to worry. He would never let someone else speak on his behalf. The more I thought about it, the more I felt that something was wrong, that a truth was being deliberately buried. As soon as the first light of dawn crept through the window, I sat up abruptly. Without another moment of hesitation, I opened my laptop and booked a flight straight to Seattle. My hands trembled as I typed in my card information, not because I hesitated over the expense, but because I knew this trip would open a new chapter and perhaps force open a hidden door of secrets in my family. I packed lightly, just a few clothes, my laptop, and some personal essentials. But I made sure to carefully place in my small suitcase a special gift for my grandfather, a vintage Marantz record player. I had spent weeks scouring vintage shops across New York to find it. I remembered the evenings sipping tea with my grandfather, listening to him recount his youth when jazz was still the soul of small street-side bars. He once told me, "Music is what helps people rise again after failure." I believed that this record player, with its classic design and warm sound, would be the perfect gift to honor my grandparents' half-century of marriage. Just imagining his smile when receiving it warmed my heart, easing some of the unease that had begun to take root inside me. On the flight back to Seattle, I sat by the window, watching white clouds drift lazily outside. Part of me wanted to believe that my mother and Emily had been telling the truth, that my grandfather was indeed unwell and the celebration truly postponed. I pictured him resting in his room, my grandmother sitting beside him holding his hand, the whole family busy taking care of him. If that were the case, then what? I would simply arrive, visit him, give him the gift, and all my suspicions would dissolve into nothing more than needless worry. But another part of me whispered that the truth was not so simple. The urgency in Emily's voice, the way my mother dodged when I pressed for details, all of it felt like tangled threads foreshadowing a hidden curtain about to be pulled aside. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, whatever awaits ahead, I have to face it. The plane landed in Seattle just as dusk was settling in. I took a taxi straight to Queen Anne, where my grandparents' mansion stood tall among the elegant streets. When the car stopped in front of the black wrought iron gate, intricately designed with floral patterns, my throat tightened. The sight before me was nothing like what I had been told. The house glowed magnificently under the golden light pouring from every window, shimmering like a castle in the city. From a distance, I could already hear the smooth notes of jazz mingling with bursts of laughter and lively conversation, vibrant and full of life. There was no sign of a postponed celebration, nor any hint that my grandfather was unwell. I clutched the gift box tightly in my hands, my heart pounding fast. My steps felt unbearably heavy as I walked toward the main entrance, as if each one was drawing me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Childhood memories rushed back, running through my grandmother's rose garden, Christmas nights spent gathered around the fireplace. This house had once been the place where I felt most at peace, but tonight it carried a strange duality, both familiar and distant, as if it were testing whether I still belonged here at all. As I stepped through the front door, the scene before me left me stunned. The grand living room sparkled under the glow of a crystal chandelier. Guests in elegant attire raised their glasses in toasts, the soft clinking of wine glasses blending with animated conversations. The tables were laden with fine wines, cured meats, imported cheeses, and exquisite pastries. And at the center of the room stood my grandparents, radiant as if age were nothing more than a number. My grandfather, in a navy suit, held my grandmother's hand tightly, his eyes brimming with joy as he embraced old friends. My grandmother, in a pearl-colored gown, wore a gentle smile, her eyes shining brightly with happiness. I nearly burst into tears seeing them healthy, full of life, nothing like the frail image my mother and Emily had painted. But that joy was fleeting. The moment my gaze fell on my parents and Emily, the atmosphere shifted instantly. They were standing near a banquet table, wine glasses still in hand. When they spotted me, all three froze at once. Emily, in a glittering red dress that accentuated every curve, widened her eyes in shock before quickly turning away, scrambling to hide her unease. My mother, Linda, gripped her glass so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her lips pressed together as if to swallow back the words she had been ready to say. My father, Daniel, forced a polite smile, but his darting eyes and restless expression betrayed his surprise, leaving him unable to mask his alarm. All of those reactions lasted only a few seconds, but to me, they stretched on like an eternity. One thing was painfully clear: they had never wanted me here. In fact, my arrival was like a sudden blow that shattered the carefully constructed script they had prepared. I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I smiled faintly and nodded to a few familiar guests, people who had known me since childhood, who had watched me grow up. They greeted me warmly, yet I still caught curious glances lingering on me, as if they were waiting for a performance to unfold. Quietly, I slipped into a seat at the long table in the middle of the room, a spot where I could observe everything without drawing too much attention. I set the Marantz gift box beside me, keeping my expression composed. My eyes drifted across the lively scene. Laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses filled the air, but inside me, every sound cut like a blade against my growing unease. I could feel the unspoken tension building in this room. Outwardly, everything looked like the perfect anniversary celebration, but beneath the surface, something was on the verge of erupting. I sat silently, watching, my heart restless. Why had they lied just to keep me away from this gathering? And why, when I appeared, did my family react as if I had ripped open a secret they had desperately tried to hide? It felt as though I had stepped onto a stage where every actor had been given their lines, everyone except me, the one deliberately written out of the script. And because of that, I knew one thing for certain. Tonight, the truth would soon come to light. The music in the room carried on, a classic jazz tune floating above the glimmer of red wine, swirling in crystal glasses, the endless hum of laughter and chatter filling every corner. I sat at the long table, forcing myself to appear composed even as doubt weighed heavily in my chest. Guests raised their glasses, joyfully toasting my grandparents for reaching half a century of marriage. My grandfather, elegant in his navy suit, looked radiant, a symbol of strength and devotion. I saw his eyes sweep across the room before settling firmly on me. He leaned slightly toward me, the movement subtle yet commanding. His voice rang out not loud, but steady and clear enough to cut through all the surrounding noise. "Olivia, the $300,000 I transferred to you after your graduation. How have you used it?" In that instant, the world seemed to stop. My body froze, my heart slammed against my ribs. The question hit me like an arrow to the chest. I swallowed hard, my lips trembling as the words slipped out in a broken whisper. 300,000? What do you mean? I never received that money. The lively sounds of the party vanished, as though someone had turned a switch and silenced everything at once. The room sank into a suffocating stillness. Guests turned their heads, eyes filled with curiosity, confusion, and a flicker of tension, all fixed on me. My father, Daniel, froze in place, the hand holding his wine glass trembling so badly that the liquid spilled over the rim. My mother, Linda, pressed her lips together so tightly it was as if she were swallowing back every word rising in her throat. And Emily, my sister, who was so used to the spotlight, her face drained of color, her eyes wide as though someone had snatched away her deepest secret. She lowered her gaze, her diamond-studded phone clutched tightly in her hand as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. In that moment, I could hear every pounding beat of my heart echoing in my chest. My grandfather's question was not merely about money, it felt like an indictment being read aloud in the middle of a celebration that should have been filled with joy. I glanced around and saw some guests whispering to each other, while others held their breath, watching as if they were witnessing an unscripted play unfold before their eyes. A chill raced down my spine, but somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the very moment when the truth was about to break through. The air in the room was taut, stretched thin like a violin string on the verge of snapping. My grandfather never took his eyes off me. His voice, low yet firm, rose again, this time loud enough for every guest to hear. "I opened a joint account and transferred $300,000 to each of you, both you and Emily, after your graduation. I announced it to the family just as I had promised beforehand, hiding nothing." "You say you never received this money, what do you mean, Olivia?" I trembled, struggling to keep my voice steady, though each word slipped out unevenly between quickened breaths. "Grandpa, I swear, I never received a single dollar apart from the scholarship you gave me before. I had no idea about that 300,000. I forced myself to meet his stern gaze, and in those eyes, unwavering and sharp, I felt an even deeper certainty. Something terrible had been concealed all along. My grandfather turned to Emily and asked, "And what about you, Emily? Did you receive the money?" Instantly, every eye in the room shifted to my sister. Emily, who was so accustomed to basking in the spotlight at parties, suddenly looked like a child cornered against a wall. She blinked rapidly, her lips trembling before she stammered out, I borrowed from the joint account, Grandpa. I thought I could invest it, make quick returns, and then pay Olivia back." Her voice cracked, weak and unconvincing, failing to persuade a single soul in the room. At that moment, my Aunt Helen, my father's sister, who had been quietly observing from the start, stepped forward. She cleared her throat, her words sharp as a blade. "Invest? I saw you shopping with armfuls of brand new Chanel and Gucci bags. Not to mention that trip to Paris last month, and suddenly driving a brand new white Mercedes. You call that investing, Emily? A murmur rippled through the crowd of guests. The same faces that had glowed with delight over their wine now darkened with discomfort, even disdain. Emily froze, her hands gripping the back of a chair, her eyes darting toward my mother in a desperate plea for help. My mother jumped in immediately, her voice rushed. Enough, this is something the family can discuss at home. Let's not make a scene in front of everyone. But before she could finish, my grandfather slammed his hand down on the table. The resounding thud silenced the room in an instant. His gaze locked on my mother, his eyes blazing with both disappointment and fury. No, Linda. This will be addressed here, right now. This is not just about money. This is about trust. I trusted all of you, and I want the truth to be spoken in front of everyone. In that charged silence, I could hear my heartbeat pounding like war drums. Emily's face had gone pale. My mother bowed her head to avoid my grandfather's piercing stare, and my father stood frozen like a statue, his lips pressed so tightly together they turned white. I knew then that the facade my family had spent years building was cracking wide open, and my grandfather was determined that no one would escape the truth. Emily, who had always thrived on the stage of endless praise, now appeared small and pitiful. Tears streamed down her face, smudging the layers of expensive makeup, and her voice broke, choked with desperation like a child cornered with no way out. I thought that money was mine, Grandpa. I believed that you loved me, so I had full rights to use it. Her sobs rang hollow, both contrived and despairing, falling into the thick, suffocating air of the room, prompting the guests around her to exchange glances and shake their heads in dismay. My grandfather remained unmoved. His eyes bore into Emily for only a moment before shifting sharply toward my parents. His voice thundered, low and cold, like the gavel striking in a courtroom. And you too? Did you know about this? My father, Daniel, lowered his head. He still clutched the wineglass in his hand, but now it was nothing more than a lifeless prop. His silence was not just avoidance, it was complicity. Everyone waited for him to speak, but all they received was a shameful quiet. My mother, Linda, at first tried to avert her gaze, but my grandfather's piercing stare made her tremble. At last, she exhaled shakily, her voice breaking with sobs that could not mask the shame beneath. Yes, I was the one who gave Emily access to the account. I thought she only needed to use it temporarily and would return it before you noticed. I never imagined it would go this far. She looked around desperately, her eyes pleading for some shred of sympathy, but the room stayed silent. Her confession only deepened the cracks that had already spread wide across our family. My grandfather gave a slight nod, but it was not a nod of forgiveness. His face darkened, the deep lines on his forehead carved sharply like the map of a long-suppressed fury. That money was for Olivia, he said, his voice firm and deliberate, each word like the strike of a cold blade. Money for her to start her career, to build something of her own, to prove the ability she earned with her sweat and tears. She deserves it. And you? You betrayed my trust. You betrayed your own daughter. A deadly silence blanketed the room. I sat frozen, my whole body trembling, torn between pain and a strange sense of wonder because for the first time, in front of the entire family, my grandfather had openly taken my side. The tension snapped when he pulled his phone from the pocket of his suit, his strong fingers tapping decisively across the screen. He raised it to his ear, his voice calm enough to chill every soul present. I need the police at the Carter residence immediately. There has been a misappropriation of $300,000. Yes, Queen Anne address. The chatter, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it vanished at once. Guests quietly set their drinks down, some clearing their throats before slipping out with polite excuses. My parents and Emily stood paralyzed, their faces pale as wax statues. I looked around and realized I was standing at the very center of a storm no one had expected to erupt in the middle of an anniversary celebration. And what both horrified and relieved me was this. My grandfather had chosen to expose the truth without disguise, without concealment. The days that followed the questioning at the police station were some of the heaviest of my life. It felt as if the entire city of Seattle had draped my family in a suffocating gray shroud, making every step feel sluggish, every breath constricted. The atmosphere inside the mansion at Queen Anne, once the proud heart of the Carter family, now hung so dense and silent that even the smallest sound was enough to make everyone flinch. News of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. Queen Anne was an upper-class community where gossip traveled faster than the wind. The Carter family had once been seen as a symbol of success, a grandfather who had built a remarkable real estate empire, a polished and elegant household that always appeared flawless in public. But in just one night, everything changed. I overheard whispers while passing the corner grocery store. Linda's daughter was accused of stealing $300,000 from her sister. And Linda, always so smug at charity events, well, her true face is out now. Whenever Emily's name or my mother's came up, prying eyes immediately followed. Some people feigned pity, others smirked with ridicule, but the worst were the curious stares, as if my family had turned into a public spectacle for their entertainment. Even I, though the victim, could not escape scrutiny. I caught fragments of murmurs. Well, in the end, she benefits. She'll inherit everything anyway. Those words, light as they sounded, cut deep. Because what they didn't know was that what I had lost was far greater than that $300,000. I had lost a part of my family, a part of my childhood, and a part of my trust. My grandfather, Richard Carter, was not the kind of man to let matters fade into silence. With the resolve of a seasoned businessman, he knew that silence meant allowing others to write the story for him. Just 1 week after the scandal, he arranged for his private lawyer to meet him in the study of the mansion. I still remember that afternoon, the sun setting behind the Olympic Mountains, the golden light spilling across a room lined with polished walnut wood. I sat beside him, my heart racing. The lawyer opened his leather briefcase and spread thick folders across the desk. The scratch of his pen against paper sounded like the rhythm of a funeral march. My grandfather wasted no words. His voice rang out, steady and resolute. I want the entire will rewritten. From this day on, this house, valued at more than $2 million, along with the entirety of the real estate investment fund, will go solely to Olivia. Daniel, Linda, and Emily will no longer appear on any inheritance papers. The lawyer looked up and nodded, his eyes betraying the gravity of the decision. He carefully recorded every word, as if sealing the fate of my family in ink. I sat there with my hands tightly clasped, my chest tightening. I knew my grandfather was doing this to protect me, to ensure that no one could ever take anything from me again. But at the same time, I understood, this was the final severing of ties, a quiet but irreversible sentence. The trial took place not long after Swift, yet unbearably heavy. The courtroom was stark and bright, its gallery filled with reporters and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row, facing the judge, while Emily and my mother sat together at the defendant's side. Emily hid behind oversized sunglasses, her once glossy blonde hair now tangled and draped messily across her face. My mother, Linda, looked thinner, her cheeks hollow, her shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of every stare. The woman who had once walked proudly through charity galas now appeared only as a worn-out shadow. The judge read the indictment, his voice steady but striking like hammer blows. Emily Carter and Linda Carter are charged with felony theft, the unlawful taking of property of significant value. After multiple hearings, the court sentences both defendants to 3 years of probation, with the condition that they repay the full $300,000 along with additional administrative fines. The entire room fell silent. I could hear the frantic scratching of reporters' pens as they captured every word, as if etching my family's disgrace into the history of the city. To comply with the sentence, they were forced to sell nearly everything of value. The gleaming white Mercedes Emily had flaunted across Instagram, the piles of Chanel and Gucci bags she had showcased weekly, the jewelry my mother had collected over years of pride, all of it went up for auction. Yet even then, the total barely reached $50,000. A pitiful sum, no more than a drop in the ocean. The rest became a crushing debt, one they would have to repay in installments for years to come, under the court's stern warning. A single missed payment, and probation could instantly turn into prison time. From that point on, the family fractured beyond repair. My father, Daniel, all but disappeared from the few meals that still remained. He withdrew into silence, a man stripped of all dignity. I had never seen him cry, but his bloodshot eyes and vacant posture in the living room spoke more loudly than tears ever could. That shame, I knew, was something he would never be able to wash away. My mother and Emily moved into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. The place was small, its walls stained and its roof leaking, a complete contrast to the lavish lifestyle they once flaunted. They avoided relatives and friends, never showing their faces at any gatherings again. Emily vanished from social media entirely, her Instagram account, once boasting tens of thousands of followers, now locked and silent. My mother, who had once been meticulous about her appearance, became just another weary middle-aged woman shopping at discount markets, dodging the eyes of neighbors. As for me, after many sleepless nights, I made a decision that changed the course of my life. I moved back to Seattle to live with my grandfather and Aunt Helen. They were the only two who had stood firmly by my side throughout the storm. When I unpacked my things in my old bedroom, my grandfather simply said, "You don't have to worry anymore. This is your home." I embraced him, and for the first time in years, my tears flowed not from pain but from the relief of finding a true anchor again. With his unwavering support, I began to build my dream. A cafe bookshop in the heart of the city. On the first day I signed the lease for the storefront, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. But my grandfather laid a steady hand on my shoulder, his voice warm and steady. "You can do this. This is your chance to turn pain into strength." Every morning, I went with Aunt Helen to local publishers to select new books. We wanted the cafe to be more than a place to drink coffee. It had to be a space where people could find knowledge and inspiration. My grandfather quietly tended to the small garden at the entrance. He planted rows of roses, the very kind my grandmother had loved, as a way of preserving the memory of their half-century of love. Day by day, the cafe began to grow into a gathering place. Customers came not only to enjoy coffee but also to join book readings, share ideas, and meet friends. I realized I was building more than a store, I was rebuilding a home. And this home wasn't rooted in money or luxury but in trust, honesty, and genuine affection. The rhythm of my heartbeat no longer raced with the chaos of the past. It pulsed steadily, reassuringly, reminding me that I had stepped into a new chapter. A chapter no longer shadowed by betrayal, but filled with the light of trust and hope. 1 year later, life had transformed more than I ever imagined. The cafe, bookshop, named Carter's Corner, officially opened on a crisp spring morning, and within just a few months, it became a familiar destination for Seattle's young crowd. The red brick walls lined with shelves of books, the rich aroma of roasted coffee drifting through the air, and the regular book readings and small discussions turned the space into a lively cultural corner in the heart of the city. I often sat behind the counter, watching guests come and go, listening to their laughter, and feeling a quiet joy swell inside me. The dream I once clung to had finally become real. My grandfather became the most special of all regulars. Every morning he came, choosing a corner by the window, opening his copy of the Seattle Times, and ordering a cappuccino. The sight of him turning each page, the morning light falling across his weathered yet contented face, always gave me a sense of peace. Aunt Helen helped me manage the cafe, from bookkeeping and inventory to chatting with customers. She often said the place was more than a business, it was proof of the power of honesty and relentless effort. One day she teased, "That quiet Olivia who used to sit silently at the family dinner table now has an entire community of her own." I only smiled, knowing she understood me better than anyone. In stark contrast to the vibrant life I was building, my parents and Emily now struggled in a shabby apartment on the outskirts of town. With no social media spotlight left, Emily vanished from Instagram, avoiding friends and sidestepping the neighbors' whispers. My mother worked part-time at an office, while my father drowned in silence, unable to lift his head in front of relatives. They chose to retreat, to cut themselves off from gatherings, as if the shadows could forever conceal the stain of their past. But I knew that was the price they had to pay for the choices they had made. Sometimes, while writing in the ledger at the end of the day, I thought about everything that had happened. The $300,000 was gone, and I knew I would likely never see it returned. But what I gained was worth far more. The trust of my grandfather, the companionship of Aunt Helen, and, most importantly, the faith I rediscovered within myself. I realized money could buy many things, but it could never buy back trust once it had been broken. And so that became my guiding principle. Greed destroys, but truth and trust endure. The money may be lost, but the lesson will remain forever. That afternoon, after tidying up the cafe and seeing off the last customer, I locked the doors of Carter's Corner. The sun dipped behind the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson, its glow reflecting off the tall buildings of Seattle. I stood still for a moment, took a deep breath, and smiled. My new life began here, a life built on honesty, resilience, and true love. And I knew that no matter how long the road ahead might be, I had finally found a path no one could ever take from me. And here are a few words I want to share with those of you listening to this story. Perhaps there is no pain deeper than being betrayed by the very people you once trusted completely. When outsiders hurt us, we can remind ourselves that they don't know us, that they are not tied to us. But when it is family, the people we call blood, who turn their backs, the pain feels like a knife driven straight into the heart, sharp, unbelievable, and almost unbearable. Many fall into the spiral of self-blame, asking, was I not good enough? Was it my fault that they treated me this way? But the truth is, you never deserved such injustice. Being betrayed does not mean you lack value. It only exposes the weakness, selfishness, or greed of others. And sometimes, life uses those painful falls to force us to rise, to see more clearly the path we are meant to take. Family may be the place where you were born, but it is not always the place that gives you the love you deserve. True love does not come from the labels of father, mother, brother, or sister. It comes from respect, from trust, and from walking beside you when you need it most. If you have ever been hurt by your family, remember that you still have the right to create a new family, not by blood, but by heart. That could be loyal friends, trusted colleagues, or even strangers who stepped in and offered you warmth. Do not let the past shackle you. Let it become a lesson, proof of how strong you truly are for surviving wounds that once felt impossible to heal. Believe in your own worth. Invest in your dreams, no matter who mocks or doubts you. Use that pain as fuel to light the path you are walking. One day, when you are standing tall, when you have achieved success, you will look back and smile. It was betrayal that taught you how to rely on yourself, how to build a life no one can ever take away. And above all, never forget that you are worthy of love and respect. If your family once failed to give you that, then give it to yourself. Love yourself, honor your efforts, and build a life you can be proud of. Because in the end, being true to yourself is the strongest foundation for happiness.